It was the fall of 1976 in West Plains, Missouri. Dan and Joyce Ahrens had just finished settling their 2 young children for the night. 3-year-old Daniel was in his room, and 1-year-old Heather was asleep in her crib. The couple climbed into bed, ready to end another ordinary day. What happened next would set in motion a series of events that would affect not just Dan and Joyce, but their entire family for decades to come. As they lay there, a bizarre red light suddenly filled the bedroom, bathing everything in an eerie glow. Dan's first thought was that there must be a fire outside. He tried to alert Joyce, but no matter how hard he tried, no words would leave his mouth, no sounds at all. And then he realised something even more disturbing. He couldn't move, neither could Joyce. They were both completely paralysed. Joyce would recall years later that she suddenly felt different. She couldn't feel her body at all. The only thing she could move were her eyes. In her head, she was screaming as loudly as she could, but nothing came out. Both of them were fully awake when that light had appeared. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't their imagination. Something was happening to them, and they were powerless to stop it. The episode seemed to last only several seconds, but for Dan and Joyce, it felt like a small eternity. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, the light went out. The room returned to darkness, and in that same instant, both of them regained full control of their bodies and their speech. Dan immediately leaned toward the bedroom window and pulled back the curtain. "What the hell was that?" he asked aloud. Joyce, still confused but able to move again, said she didn't know. Then their attention turned to Heather's crib. She was now standing up inside the cot, her eyes wide open and, as they would later describe, huge. Both parents remained completely confused by what had just happened, but rather than discuss it, they simply settled their daughter back down and returned to sleep. They wouldn't speak of those events for years. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. It wasn't until the early 1990s that Dan and Joyce began to explore what had really happened that night. When they contacted a researcher who specialised in such matters, they discovered they weren't the only members of the family who had experienced something strange, not just that night, but on many occasions after. Heather, now a young woman, recalled that for as far back as she could remember, there was a recurring nightmare she had. In this nightmare, there was this gigantic monster. She struggled to fully explain it because the dream had this dark focus to it. But she could recall one thing clearly. She remembered looking into a strange eye in which she could see her own reflection. When Heather was only 11 years old, she drew a picture of this monster. The drawing depicted a creature that anyone today would immediately recognise as a typical grey alien. Large head, big dark eyes, small features. But here's what makes this significant. At the time Heather drew that picture, the Ahrens family had no knowledge of alien abductions. This picture was drawn before Whitley Strieber's book Communion was released, a book that famously featured an almost identical image on its cover. Joyce recalled that when Heather first showed them the picture, she and Dan didn't really understand what their daughter was talking about. They didn't believe her. They thought it was simply her imagination, sparked by intense bad dreams. But it wasn't just Heather who showed signs that something strange had happened. Daniel, though recognised more in hindsight, also appeared to have experienced something truly out of the ordinary. He would recall 2 decades later that he truly believed something had happened back in 1976. His father remembered that on multiple occasions they would wake up in the morning and then have to hunt around the house to find Daniel. He was often discovered in another room instead of his bedroom, under a chair, under a table, even in a closet. Dan said it was very strange, almost as if his son was hiding from something, but neither father nor son knew what. 15 years after that night in 1976, something happened to Dan that would finally force the memories to the surface. Joyce received a call from her husband while he was at work. He asked her to come and collect him and drive him to the hospital. During the drive, Dan's heart was pounding. He couldn't breathe. He genuinely believed he was having a heart attack. He was admitted to the hospital, and doctors quickly established that he wasn't having a heart attack, but they couldn't figure out what the problem actually was. Several doctors examined him. One believed he was having a series of panic attacks, possibly caused by severe stress. Another suggested he might have an inner ear infection. Ultimately, his condition remained undiagnosed. From that point on, Dan became something of a recluse. Joyce recalled that he couldn't do anything. He couldn't work. He couldn't leave the house. She quickly came to believe there was nothing physically wrong with her husband, but that there appeared to be something mentally wrong. More importantly, Dan himself had a feeling that there was something in the back of his mind that was just trying to come out. Eventually, that something did force its way to the surface. One night, Dan and Joyce were watching the movie Communion at home. There was a particular scene where a small alien peeked around from behind a doorway. As soon as that scene came on, Dan burst into tears. He recalled noticing these piercing eyes staring out from behind that door. For a very split second, he had a flashback of what had happened back in 1976. Joyce witnessed his reaction. She said he was absolutely hysterical, crying uncontrollably. At the time, she had no idea why he was reacting that way. After that episode, Dan and Joyce began to wonder if what Dan had seen in that movie was connected to the strange night in 1976. They also began to consider whether his sudden panic attacks, the ones that had left him unable to leave the house, might be connected too. About a week later, while watching television again, Dan saw a program featuring John Carpenter, a psychiatric therapist who had worked extensively with people who claimed they had been victims of alien abduction. Carpenter had received referrals from other therapists, including the well-known researcher Bud Hopkins, and had worked on over 100 cases. Dan contacted Carpenter and began the slow process of piecing together what had really happened that evening in 1976. When they first spoke and Dan told Carpenter about the strange night, the panic attacks, and his intense reaction to the Communion movie, Carpenter cautioned him. He said they might very well find other explanations besides alien abduction. Dan agreed to undergo hypnotic regression, but as the sessions progressed, it became clear that those other explanations were not very likely. During one session, as Dan was taken back to that evening in 1976, he offered to Carpenter that a strange figure was showing him something. When Carpenter instructed him to take a good look, Dan responded that the object appeared metal, like a little spade. Then he added, "It's going to hurt." Initially, Dan kept the details of the sessions to himself. But a short time after he began meeting with Carpenter, Joyce started having her own flashback recollections. Not just flashbacks, but conscious memories that came flooding back. She said there wasn't anything she could do to stop them from coming back. Following these sudden recollections, Joyce also visited Carpenter to undergo hypnotic regression. It wasn't long before Carpenter realised that not only had both Dan and Joyce likely been abducted, they had likely been abducted together at the same time. The strange evening with the red light in the fall of 1976 was determined to be the couple's first shared abduction experience. Under hypnosis, the details of that night began to emerge. Dan recalled that he was cowering in the corner of the bed, scared to death. There was a little being at the foot of the bed. There was also another being with Joyce, and a third at the crib where baby Heather had been sleeping. Joyce also recalled seeing 3 of these unsettling entities. She said one of them touched her arm, causing her to sit up on the bed. She watched in horror as they took Heather out of the crib and began to carry her off. She said years later that these beings, were in such control, and you can't do anything. You're literally watching a kidnapper take your child, and you can't do anything about it. Dan remembered seeing this too. He recalled feeling overwhelming helplessness as he watched the events happen. Under regression, he described one of the beings heading toward the crib. He was unable to move. He had no control over what was happening. Joyce further recalled that both she and her husband were marched outside by these strange beings. The entire family was then floated onto a craft. She said she never wanted it to happen to her children, and she didn't realise until later that it had. It would be another 5 years before Heather, now in her early 20s, agreed to undergo hypnosis herself, and the revelations would be startling. Carpenter noted that Dan and Joyce made a very special effort not to discuss what they had learned during their sessions in front of their children. They suspected that Daniel and Heather had also been abducted, and they didn't want to influence their children's own, potentially suppressed memories. At first, Heather was a bit dubious about hypnotic regression and whether it would reveal anything of significance. But as soon as the session was underway, memories and flashes came to the forefront of her mind almost immediately. She recalled that one of the beings had taken her out of her room and that she was taken on board something. This strange creature repeatedly asked her if she wanted to play, specifically if she wanted to play telepathic games. Heather said she always answered that she didn't want to play, that she wanted to go home. Daniel, despite the fact that he had repeatedly been discovered asleep in different rooms of the house as a child, believed at first that he had not been part of any strange events. He acknowledged that something obviously happened to his parents and to his sister, but he admitted he was a little too scared to discover what memories he might have. Whenever his parents spoke about the encounters, even just between themselves, Daniel found listening to the details too emotional. Eventually, though, he agreed to undergo hypnotic regression. Carpenter focused on the recurring dream that had plagued Daniel since he was a young child, believing it would be an ideal exploration point since it was likely triggered by suppressed memories of a very real event. After taking Daniel through the basics of hypnotic regression and reassuring him that just because his family had recalled bizarre events didn't mean he necessarily would, Carpenter guided him back to his childhood around age 5. Eventually, he brought Daniel to the recurring dreams. When asked where he was when the dream began, Daniel said he was in bed. He could hear a noise that sounded like a can dropping. It was coming from the garage. Something was in the garage. He recalled feeling so scared that he didn't even want to look. Then he suddenly realised he was no longer in his room. He was somewhere completely different, a location he had never seen anything like before. He described the surroundings as stony. This is an intriguing detail because many other abductees recall their surroundings looking stone-like, with some describing them as biblical, including stone-like tables and furniture. Daniel recalled seeing two strange beings standing in front of him. He described them as tall, with real long fingers, big heads and dark eyes. As the session progressed, it appeared Daniel was recalling these entities walking toward him. Despite his fear, he continued to describe them. They had no hair and no ears. Their mouths looked like a coin slot. More concerning was what one of them held. The figure had something in his hand that looked like a shiny stick. Daniel said this stick appeared wand-like, and the figure was making it move in front of him. Then the figure placed the stick either on or into the back of Daniel's head. This detail appears in multiple other abduction accounts, where witnesses describe a stick-like device touched to the skin, often causing paralysis, or placed to the head, sometimes resulting in visions or other transfers of information. Daniel said that when the stick was placed to his head, it hurt. When Carpenter finally brought Daniel out of hypnosis, after more than 2 hours, he said, "That wasn't a dream, was it, Dan?" Daniel replied, as if he had always known, "No." Before the session, Carpenter had asked Daniel about any strange marks, bruises or cuts that he had suddenly noticed on his body. Daniel recalled one specific time when he did indeed discover something strange. He woke up one morning and headed to the bathroom as he always did. But that particular morning, he discovered a spoon-shaped mark on his left inner thigh. He immediately told his father about it, saying he didn't know where it came from or how he got it. To his shock, his father had also discovered the exact same mark in the exact same place on his own body. Daniel was left in an extremely emotional state following the session. He would later say that if alien abduction has never happened to you, feel fortunate. He wouldn't wish it upon anybody. Carpenter stated that people who watch programs about this on television and think it's just entertainment, that people are making it up, would perhaps feel differently if they sat through these regression sessions and felt these people's confusion and trauma and absolute panic firsthand. The Ahrens family came to believe that not only had they and their children been victims of repeated alien abductions, but that at least one of their grandchildren had also received visits from these creatures. The grandchild referred to them as his little buddies that come into his room and play. On one occasion, following what may have been another encounter, he even told his grandmother Joyce that he wanted to watch the ship leave. To many in UFO research circles, this is not surprising. Many repeat abduction encounters are reported across multiple generations of the same family. There could be several reasons for this, perhaps something to do with the genetics of the family. Joyce also recalled another disturbing detail. During one of her abduction experiences, she remembered one of the beings taking a very long needle that was pressed to her right temple. She heard the device crunch as, she suspected, some tiny device was inserted into her head. Some people, particularly skeptics, were suspicious that the Ahrens family might have concocted the whole affair before the hypnotic regression sessions took place. However, as Carpenter pointed out, this would require all of them to know what the trick questions and leading suggestions were, and then how to successfully avoid them. These techniques are often unique to the person conducting the session. Carpenter also highlighted that there are many details they wouldn't know about that investigators look for as markers for truthfulness and reliability when comparing with other abduction data. It would be highly unlikely that 4 people could have orchestrated such a hoax. The Ahrens family appeared to be very credible people whose accounts deserved serious consideration. Whether the Ahrens family continued to experience these strange encounters in the years that followed remains largely unknown. They had no desire to court mass publicity and wished, as much as possible, to lead what most would consider a normal life. Dan Aarons himself stated publicly that he had significantly more to lose than gain by speaking about these encounters. This is a concern shared by many other people who report similar experiences. Both of the Aarons children reportedly suffered significant, long-lasting mental effects from the encounters. The trauma was clearly very real to the family members who lived through these experiences. Joyce Aarons perhaps summed up the frustration felt by many who have reported similar experiences when she said that if this is some kind of mental thing that's happening to people, then why aren't the scientists or the doctors trying to find a cure? It's a fair point. The tendency of mainstream academia to dismiss claims of alien abduction outright may be doing humanity a disservice, whatever the truth finally turns out to be. The Aarons family's experiences remain officially unexplained. The events they described, the paralysis, the red light, the beings, the recovered memories, all align with patterns reported by countless other individuals around the world. Whether these encounters represent genuine contact with non-human intelligence, some form of shared psychological phenomenon, or something else entirely, the impact on this family was profound and lasting. Their willingness to come forward, despite having more to lose than gain, suggests they believed they were telling the truth about what happened to them. Whatever conclusions one might draw about the Aarons family case, it stands as one of the most detailed accounts of multi-generational alien abduction on record. The consistency of their testimonies, the presence of physical marks, the behavioural patterns in the children, and the emotional trauma evident during the regression sessions all point to something genuinely disturbing having occurred. The question of what that something actually was remains unanswered.